forward for you. And I'm going to share a screen. We have just a few images that we will show you as we go along. Everybody here okay? I'm seeing nods. Great. Okay, so I wanted to introduce our folks today. And if you can wave so they can see you, we have Mari Coates. All of our guests are from California. Mari is up in the Bay Area, and her most recent book is The Pelton Papers, is the one that she's going to speak about today. And so many of our artists are probably familiar with Agnes Pelton, the author, the artist. And she actually worked at UC Press. We learned we both worked at UC Berkeley at the same time. It's funny how the world works. So welcome, Mari. We're very happy to have you here. Joanna is also here with us. And I think sometimes she goes by Jo. Joanna was raised in Southern California in Hollywood. And the book she's going to talk about today is The Artist Colony, which I think you'll all really enjoy hearing about because it's talking about Carmel by the sea, an artist colony. And she has a family connection to it, which she will talk about a little bit as well. And both of these books are novels that have thought about, reimagined, interpreted the lives of women artists, which I think is really fascinating. Last but not least, we have Peg Alford Pursell, who is an author in her own right, who's going to moderate the conversation. And I think what I love, Peg, you also have a nonprofit book press, which I really admire. That is not an easy path. So you all should check that out. It's WTAW, Why There Are Words. I looked that up. So I really applaud you for that. That's not an easy gig. So we hope you'll support all of these authors today and purchase their books on Amazon. And if you do it through Amazon Smile and give AWA a donation, that's not a bad thing either. So we will move forward. I think, Joanna, you're going to start with us. I will hand it over to Peg.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandra.
Absolutely.
I think that, okay, so I realized that maybe we didn't really get into any in-depth introductions, but maybe given that, you know, we had a little bit of here in the Bay Area, we had a little bit of time zone challenges. So maybe it would just be better if we got into the books. And so, you know, here is Joanna's book, and I don't think I have my screen mirrored. If I did, you would see it saying The Artist Colony. And I think, you know, maybe the best thing to do, but give me 1 second before I get into that. I just want to say, Sandra, thank you so much for setting up this program and for the American Women Artists organization, I think you go by. But I think this is just such a wonderful event, and I know it's new for you all, but I've long thought that there are so many synergies and overlaps between the visual arts and literary arts. And I mean, that would be a whole topic unto itself. And I think we could really, that would be wonderful to explore, but I don't think we're going to have time for that today. And so I really do hope that there will be more of these events, and you won't let our sort of absent-minded time zone challenges affect that. And also, thank you to everybody who's here today. I'm really so glad that you are here. Okay, so now let me go back to Joanna's book. This is the newer of the two books. So this is why I think we're going to go first with her book. And what I would like is if she could read a bit from it, just give you all a little sample, a little taste of what the book is about. How do you feel about that, Joanna? Would you read to us a little bit?
I am going to read to you a bit. I would like to give a little preface to the story.
Absolutely.
The book is called The Artist Colony, and it does take place in Carmel by the Sea, but it takes place in the 1920s. And the inspiration behind that is this painting that you are now looking at, which is called The Eucalyptus Trees. And it was painted by my great aunt, Ada Champlin. So I'm going to read first from the introduction to explain why this painting is up on the screen. And then I'll read two other very, very short scenes just to give you a feel of where the book is coming from. But know that this is an historical mystery and that it does take place in the 1920s in Carmel by the Sea. And the inspiration is right here in front of you, how it all started with my ideas to research Carmel by the Sea and come up with this historical mystery. That said, here we go. This is in the intro of the book. If I hadn't inherited a landscape painting by my great aunt, Ada Champlin, and if I hadn't moved to Carmel Valley, California, because of that wondrous landscape, I would still be in Manhattan, and I would have written a different story. After my husband and I moved into our new home, I hung Ada landscape over the stone fireplace. I wondered where in Carmel she had stood to paint the country road bordered by a row of eucalyptus trees in a golden pasture lit by a blue sky brushed lightly with clouds like white powder puffs. In the background, a range of mountains rose in purple splendor. I am not a painter, but I think the artist colony started on a blank canvas, not a blank piece of paper. I had a palette of vivid ideas. As I brushstroke layer upon layer of pigments onto that imaginary canvas, it evolved into an historical novel set in 1924 when Carmel by the Sea was a thriving women's art colony. I became very curious about an art colony populated by women who, like my great aunt, had become painters at a time when it was déclassé for a woman to do anything artistic beyond needlepoint. Women were expected to marry and make babies, not art. I wondered how Ada succeeded as a painter under these restraints. Soon I was deep into a mystery plot, interweaving the history of Carmel's art colony with the actions of my characters. As my research expanded, I added real people, the poet Robinson Jeffers and his wife Una, the painters Armin Hansen, William Michel, and Auguste Gasquet, and had them meet my fictional characters in the locations where they had lived. Then I stepped back and let them tell their story. So that is the introduction to give you a full idea of how this all came about. And now I'm going to read a scene. So it's an historical mystery. It's about two sisters. One sister was a famous painter who did landscape painting. She is in no relation. She's completely fiction. Her name is Ada, but she has nothing to do with my great aunt, Ada. I just like the name. So she is a famous artist living in Carmel by the Sea. And unfortunately, something happens and she is dead under suspicious circumstances. Her sister, Sarah, lives in Paris. She receives a cable from the sheriff, marshal of Carmel by the Sea, saying, your sister is passed. We're very concerned. We need you at the inquest. Please come immediately. Sarah is a painter also, and she is about to have a show in Paris where she lives and studies art. So when she receives this cable, of course, she's incredibly upset about her sister. But at the same time, she's in the middle of getting ready for her show. So as hard as it is for her to leave Paris, of course she does, because she loves her sister. And she goes to Carmel by the Sea to find out what happened. Throughout the story, a major character, though it's a studio, it takes in Carmel by the Sea, and that is where she goes to live, and that studio is called the Sketchbox, and that is where her sister lived until she passed away. She is coming into the studio of Ada Bell for the first time, and Sarah is upset. She's coming into also the home of Ada Bell for the first time. The odor of linseed oil, turpentine, and cobalt chloride escaped from the studio and tickled her nose when she stepped inside. Slanted rays of the morning sun drifted through a skylight and illuminated the landscapes that were hanging from the white plastered walls. Sarah's eyes crossed the paint-splattered wooden floor to a grand window framed in the northern wall, a window as important to a painter as pen and paper is to a writer. Its mellow light cast a soft glow over the canvases propped against the other walls. The studio was an immense space with a large storage loft at one end, and even though Ada had described it in detail, Sarah was still impressed. No wonder Ada couldn't wait to show it to her. Few artists ever had a studio of these proportions. In Paris, she was cramped in a communal studio where the students had to share splinters of light coming through one window. "This is simply glorious," she whispered, arching her back to look up through the blue, blue sky framed in the skylight. Her eyes followed the stream of dust motes down onto a large canvas propped up on an easel. She wondered if it was something Ada was working on before she died and walked over to it. She recoiled. It was not Ada's work. Thick brushstrokes of oily ebony paint had created monstrous waves that seemed to be flailing down on a narrow strip of beach. The blood-red sky above the waves was like the underworld in Dante's Inferno. She touched the crest of a foamy black wave. The wet oil stained her fingers and sent chills down her back. The canvas had been recently painted. So that is a scene to give you a feeling of the historical mystery and the fact of how the artists are so connected to my story. And Sandra, would you mind changing so they can see the studio? I'm still seeing the eucalyptus trees. This is the entrance of the Sketchbox. And actually this was my great aunt's studio. And through my historical research, I found it. It still existed, and it's on Camino Real in Carmel by the beach. You can see it, you can see this gate. And then if you do the second one, when I found this, I also found a wonderful friend. And this is a third generation painter who now lives in the studio. Only 3 people have lived in the studio, and all 3 have been artists in the last 100 years. The second artist who had the studio was Frank Moore. And the third artist who lives there now is Belinda Vidor. And she and I became very close friends. But you can imagine doing this research about my aunt and to actually find the studio and find it very much like it was when my great aunt lived there. Now I'm just going to finish with one short little clip, and we're going to change if you could put the other painting up there. This is a painting that Ada Bell made. And understand again that I knew very little about my great aunt. I learned as I did research in Carmel and found out about the artist colony. And this is a painting that actually belongs to my sister. And this was a painting that Ada Bell did in the 1920s. And that is Point Lobos, for those of you who know Point Lobos. So Sarah's trying to figure out who killed her sister. So she decides she needs to know the artist, she needs to spend time in the village and get to know people, then hopefully find out, because it is her understanding now from a very close friend of Ada Bell's that her sister, with suspicious circumstances, it's not a suicide. It's not an accident. She was murdered. So it's now up to Sarah to find out who killed her sister. So she's become very close to the community of artists, and she's now going to take a lesson from the teacher of Ada Bell, who's a famous artist himself, who now is teaching young women at the artist colony in Carmel by the Sea. When she arrived on the beach, she spotted the students draped in long black smocks, standing like a colony of penguins. Their heads were bobbing up and down under wide-brimmed straw hats as they gazed out at the calm sea and back again at their canvases. Their black parasols, which effectively blocked out the direct sunlight, fluttered in the breeze. Sarah unfolded the 3 skinny legs that supported her easel and stuck them into the sand. Picking over several tin tubes of oil paint in her sketchbox drawer, she squeezed canary yellow, carmine red, and titanium white onto her palette board. Mixing the familiar pigments gave her a surge of energy, and she quickly dipped a wide brush into the oils and made short brushstrokes across the canvas. To get more vivid splashes of color, she added cadmium orange. Then, with a palette knife, she smeared a thick glob of white over the orange. I thought you'd studied the basic techniques of plein air under your sister's tutelage, said the teacher severely. Unnoticed, he had walked up behind her and was passing judgment over her shoulder. Without stopping her work, she said, "That was when Ada was teaching at the Art Students League, and I was her student. For the past 3 years, I've been studying at the Académie Julian in Paris, where I've learned a more modern approach." "That's very apparent," he said. "I hope your sister's teachings weren't wasted on you." She waited until his sandy bare feet were gone before she wiped the gooey white oil from her fingers and furiously mixed more oils on her palette. Hadn't he told her to paint what she saw? For her, the clouds were not clouds, but white sheets drying on a clothesline. And the waves splashing and falling against the coarse, jagged rocks were raindrops in vibrant shades of orange dripping down a crimson wall. And I will stop there. Thank you. Okay.
Just beautiful, Joanna. I'm really captivated. I could have listened on, and thank you for sharing so many of the different points of inspiration and research. There's so much that, my mind is just sort of abuzz with a lot of really rich information and so many questions I have, but thank you and congratulations on this book. Again, it's the Artist Colony for everyone who's tuned in. And now let's go to Mari, Mari Coates and the Pelton Papers. And of course, excuse me, this is, not mirrored, but this is, I have known Mari for a number of years, and I had the great fortune and privilege of knowing her for a number of years, and the great privilege of having read this novel in different revisions and incarnations, and it's just been such a wonderful experience to see it in print and to see how it turned out. So I think a good idea would be to have Mari read just a little sample of this novel for you all, so you can get a taste of what it's about. Mari?
Thank you, Peg, and thank you, Sandra, for having us today. This is really exciting for me. I bet that quite a few of you are familiar with the work of Agnes Pelton. And if you're not, you're going to be really excited to be, because she was one of the early modernists, really early, like 1913 Armory show early. And she had a tempestuous life. However, by nature, she was a contemplative. She really was. She was kind of a hermit and a contemplative. And she lived not all her life, but most of it in Brooklyn with her mother and grandmother. And then finally, when her mother died, she sold that house and moved. And she moved to Southampton first on Long Island. And there were rich people in Southampton today as there were rich people back then. And a friend of hers, who happened to be my grandfather, suggested that she might earn a living by painting portraits. So that is what she did. And she only came for the summer in 1921. She came for the summer. And then she decided to stay. So what I'm going to read is just a little bit of she moved into a windmill and she painted that windmill. And so I'm going to read a little bit about Southampton and all that. So Southampton bustled all summer, and I continued to work hard, overjoyed at seeing old friends and grateful for the money coming in that kept my savings intact. It was an intoxicating time, and I observed my own elation with caution. Sure enough, as summer faded, I found myself longing for solitude. I considered returning to Taos, where she had visited her friend Mabel Dodge. But to re-enter Mabel's world was to risk the very access to myself I was just beginning to find. Instead, I began asking around Southampton about taking a place for the winter. Almost as a joke, someone told me that the old hay ground grist mill on tiny Mecox Bay had closed its operations and was for rent. I received this information on my birthday at the end of August, which heightened the significance, and I asked my friends Emma and Harold to drive me there to see it. It was getting toward evening when we rounded the bend, and I caught sight of it on top of a small hillock and reaching its huge arms in the four directions as the late day sun poured gold directly onto it. I stepped out of the car and approached, and standing in the mill's shadow, caught an immediate sense of its spiritual power. "Well," Emma called out. "Yes," I replied. The next day, feeling suspended in a nameless grace, I contacted the mill's owner and arranged to lease it. 1 month later, I watched as men from the Brooklyn storage facility unloaded my few possessions from their truck and maneuvered them into the mill. I realized that I had left my things this long in Brooklyn to create a kind of anchor. Their presence here was now a sobering reminder that for the first time in my life, I had no home to return to other than the one before me. A breeze gusted up the treeless hill and made me shiver and wonder what I was doing. To stay out of the mover's way, I opened my sketchbook to a new page. I drew the faded grasses as they bent in the wind, the thickets of cedar and bayberry, and the few locust trees that hugged the downward slope. Looking southward past the highway below, the slope was hugged by bayberry and beach plum, and I could see all the way to the ocean. Excuse me. To the north, a short walk from my front door, a cluster of pine trees surrounded Mecox Bay. The silence was made of ocean and wind, and I began to feel an enormous sense of relief at the prospect of being alone in it. The movers emerged and waited in a cluster while their boss approached me with a list of what they had transported, which I signed. He wished me good luck, shaking his head a bit at the idea that anyone would choose to live here, and joined his men in the van. I felt a frisson of triumph as the visibly lightened trunk truck backed down the mill's dirt track, creaking and tipping as it found the potholes. The driver waved as he swung out onto the road, turned west, and drove away toward New York. With autumnal light at my back, I entered my new home. The mill's works had been removed, but the center post and crossbeams remained. I could easily reach up and touch the nearest one with my head. And I did so, feeling sheltered and protected by its weight and heft. On a thick hook that had once lifted bags of grain, I had hung a kerosene lantern, and I struck a match now to light it. Immediately, my mother's piano, angled against the segmented wall, took on a glow. I pulled out the bench, sat down, and played a few exploratory chords. The windmill's tall, hollow space expanded the sound. What splendid acoustics, I could hear her marvel. This brought a sense of her companionship in this enterprise. A sudden surge of emotion caught me by surprise, and the familiar rumblings of self-doubt began to gather. My glory days, such as they were, had flashed and faded. My friends in New York didn't know what to do with me. Others had scattered, and our relationships had changed. Now, in a panic and suffused with grief, my mother impaired and frail was still my mother. I asked myself what she would say. "Open your music," was the clear reply. My study books were under the lid of the piano bench, and on top, I found Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. And I'll stop. And Agnes moved to the desert of California about 14 years after that. And she moved into a town near Palm Springs that's called Cathedral City for some reason. And there's a painting of that, Sandra. It's called Large Desert. Oh, this is my grandmother. Can you go back? That's my grandmother who's behind me right now. And she was painted in that mill, as was my mother in 1921, and my at the time, 6-year-old uncle. So these paintings have been treasured by us, of course, but nobody ever heard of Agnes Pelton. So I was shocked and absolutely astonished when in 1996, I live across the bay from the Oakland Museum. I saw a review of an Agnes Pelton retrospective, which featured a few of these old paintings, but mostly these stunning abstracts done in brilliant color. But if you want to, this is where she lived, was in Cathedral City, and she painted this and sent it to my grandmother. They were very good friends. And Sandra, can you get back to, there we go, thank you. And that is as Cathedral City appeared in 1936 when Agnes first moved there. And what she did was she took a postcard that you could send to people and tacked it to the back. It's still there. And she drew in little tiny where Agnes was planning to build her studio. And she loved the desert. She loved its light. She loved its silence. Of course, it's all changed. There's very little silence now, but it's still there. And what I saw in Oakland in the museum completely shifted my my viewpoint of her. I knew she was very spiritual, deeply spiritual. My family would call her deeply religious, which she would not approve of. That's not what she was. She was deeply spiritual. And she believed, she was very interested in Kandinsky, who also in 1913 published his Concerning the Spiritual in Art. and she kind of took his cue that art could convey a spiritual experience to the viewer, and it could transform the viewer, and that she believed very deeply. So the painting that I sent to Sandra to show you is her last painting. And this one is called Light Center. It is the second light center she painted, but it's possible if you look really hard to see, looks like pencil marks on the side of the orb, the egg orb, outside the little squiggly circle. And those are indeed pencil marks. She painted this at the end of her life, and she was dying of cancer, and she didn't have that long. And when she realized that she wasn't going to be able, she would paint up in many, many, many layers. And when you see this painting live, and if you ever have a chance to, I encourage you to make an effort to go see it, you will see ghosting under the blue, and the whites are black marks, because she'd start with, here's, this is what I'm going to do, maybe a sketch, maybe the orb, and then cover them layer after layer. And the effect when you see her abstracts, and actually her landscapes too, is a sense of glowing. They are all resonant with color and meaning. And this one, it seems that what she did was decide that she was going to crop it, because she wasn't going to make it to finish the picture, and she didn't. But what we have of her breakthrough, she's had many breakthroughs, including the 1913 show, and then she had a breakthrough after visiting Taos, New Mexico, and came back to New York to start showing again. And then the Depression hit, and the stock market crashed practically like a week before the big exhibit she was to have in New York City. It just, and she was a very sensitive person, so she felt all that very deeply. And so then we had another breakthrough for her. The Phoenix Museum of Art did put together an exhibition that was to travel first to Santa Fe, New Mexico, because Agnes had been there, and then to New York at the Whitney Museum. And man, I was going to be there. And so I arranged, my book was coming out in April 7th, 2020. So I arranged a whole tour in New York, and I have lots of friends there. I'm from there and have tons of friends there. And I was going to do a reading at a bookshop there, and all that was just wonderful. And Agnes's show opened to the public. It opened to the press on March 10th, and then it opened to the public on March 13th, and it closed on March 13th, the same day, for the pandemic. And everything shut down then, and we all shut down, and and it was very difficult, really. And as you know, I bet you didn't know that. So what happened was the Whitney did keep the exhibit up, and they promised that they would reopen it when the museum could open again. And it took a long time, but in the fall of 2021, is that right? I did go to the Whitney in New York and saw the show, which was just spectacular as I had hoped. And so I don't know if maybe it'll come to Missouri. It's not out of the realm of possibility. She's getting more known, but I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah. Well, Mari, I think, first of all, I have to say that no matter how many times I've read the Pelton Papers or heard you read from it, I never grow tired of it. So everyone,
It's
again,
like
that's
Peg lived through the Pelton Papers. Peg read like every word that hit the floor,
But so everyone, it's the Pelton Papers by Mari Coates, and also The Artist Colony by Joanna Fitzpatrick. And I believe that Sandra put links in or in the chat, or it's on the website, or but you can easily find these. And I believe there's a way that if you purchase them through the links that Sandra has, I think there's like a little, I think it benefits the American women artists. So, follow those if you can, but otherwise, you can definitely get them many places. Now, there's just so much to talk about. And I think I just want to encourage everyone that's here. If you have, I'm sure some questions have been brewing in your minds as you were listening to each of these artists read from their works. So please go ahead and put your questions into the chat. And I think I'm going to, there's so many things I want to ask and talk about, but I know we don't have the time, as I've said, even before we got started. But so I'm going to ask something that I think also very much applies to the visual arts. Of course, both of our authors here have talked about a little bit, the inspiration for, where they be, where the ideas, let's say, came from to begin writing these works. And we could delve into that much, much more. But I think what I want to ask about, that many of the visual artists that are here could also relate to, is, okay, so you get the inspiration, then, and you're working on it, and then you reach these places where you begin to wonder if the craft part, if the technical, if you will, know-how that you have, I think there's a part where you start to reach some doubts, like, can I possibly pull this off? And I have to believe that this has to be very similar for visual artists. And, I think about this all the time. So we go to a gallery, we go wherever, and we view, visual art and paintings and so on. And you often hear someone saying, oh, I could do that. I could draw that. I could paint that. I could make that. And we literary artists have the same thing. I could write that. People have been telling me I need to write a book. I could write that. And we often, there's such a similarity there that there is not at all an understanding of, it's not just inspiration. It's not just, there are all these aspects behind it. And so I'm wondering if each of you could talk about how you managed to go through all these times of wondering if you really had the know-how, the chops, the talent, the everything that goes into sort of the craft part to make the art. And I wonder if each of you could talk about that a little bit. And could we start with you, Joanna? And also, again, anybody who has any questions, please put them in the chat. But let's go ahead and go with Joanna first.
So you're asking about, I mean, the story first comes, any story, and I would assume a painting also comes from needing to put that painting on an easel. I mean, on easel, on a canvas. And it's the same with writing, as I mentioned in my introduction. It's about getting started. You have to get started, and you do have to have, I believe, with all my books, you have to have an inspiration to be able to put the amount of energy in that it's going to take before you get an end result. And I think in all the arts, it's very similar. So as far as like doubt, I mean, yeah, I think you've got to have some skills. You can't just write. A lot of people are just writing books. I have to say there's a lot of that going on out there. But I think us who consider ourselves professional writers or professional painters, you have to come from studying the work. And I think the major place where you go as a writer, you go to other writers. And I would assume that painters go to other painters. And you learn so much. For me, reading books. Anytime I have a problem, anytime I'm questioning my own work, I have my bookshelf here filled with my most favorite books, and I return to them all the time. And that's where I deal with my doubt. If I'm doubting my work, I go and read one of those wonderful people, and they're like in my room with me, they're my friends, and they direct me where I need to go.
That's wonderful. Absolutely. So I'll just not editorialize and go to Mari. How about you, Mari? How did you, how did you persevere through those times of, the sort of the doubts and the, can I pull this off?
I called
thing?
You. Peg and her husband Cass had a wonderful, wonderful writing group in their home. And I was privileged to be part of that for quite a few years. And I would write something and go, oh, this is the worst thing and then I'd send it off anyway, and we'd look at each other's work before we got together. And the thing that shocked me was that everyone was actually interested. I just didn't think anyone would be interested. And that's, So, but what I also was doing was trying to figure out how to get this story told. Now, the catalog of that first exhibition is this, and the author of this catalog, who unfortunately died much too young, but he was the curator and the museum director at Pepperdine University Museum. And he's the one, I think it was his PhD work or something, to get, to put this show together. And no one had done this show. This is the very first time. So he, in a very well-crafted way, it's about 100 pages, including illustrations. He did a perfectly beautiful sketch of her life, which is filled with fraught times and difficult times and all of that. But he gave me it's kind of chock full of really interesting things and interesting people she studied with and interesting people she knew, and the biggest scandal of the 19th century, which her grandmother was part of. So, so I knew it had to be her whole life, but I had no idea what to do. So I was early on, I rode BART to the Bay Area rapid transit over the bay, under the bay to Berkeley every day. And I was just sitting there, and a train is such a wonderful place to kind of contemplate. And I was just sitting there with a pad open, and I couldn't write it in the third person. Every time I tried in the third person, it sounded phony to me. It just sounded awful. And so I thought, well, I don't know how to do this, and I sure don't want to write first person. If any of you is a writer, you know how hard that is. It would be like painting, maybe like a self-portrait. I don't know, but it's very hard. So I was sitting here writing on this pad, and I had this voice in I said, well, what would she want to do? What would she want to say? And she wanted to say, I want to draw big pictures with lots of this or that. I can't remember exactly, but it was so compelling. I just wrote it down and just started listening. And I just listened for a long time. And it took a really long time. I hate to tell you how long it took to write this book. But it pared down a little bit. It wasn't quite so crazy or wild, but it felt authentic to me. Then I was afraid. Then I started research because I love research, and I started research and was terrified of looking at her actual papers because I thought, what if I've got this wrong? What if I am just completely wrong about this voice? And I thought, well, I change your name then because I love this voice and I'm going to stay with it. And so I did. And when I finally did feel that I could look at her journals where her writing appears, they were interchangeable to me, which really freaked me out at first. But it was at least reassuring that I had indeed gotten it right. So, and yeah, thank you.
We did have a question in chat of how long it ultimately took you to write the book, the Pelton Papers.
It took me 17 years on and off. I quit several times.
And that quitting is about what we were talking about, having these moments of doubt and having concerns about how to create the art. Maybe this isn't the right approach. Maybe again, this isn't, should I be writing it from first person? Should it be third person? All of these technical, technical for the literary arts, very technical considerations, which I think, do have their counterpart in, again, in visual arts. And it also occurred to me, Joanna, how about you? How long did it take you to write your book? And sorry, Mari, if you had more to say about it, but I was curious because I personally am more familiar with, how long you worked on your book and the changes, but I'm very curious, since I don't know as much about the artist colony with Joanna. How long did you work on how did that go? How was the process with that?
Well, books some people can write books very quickly. I've never been able to do that. This is my third book, and each of my books have taken at least 5 years. But I do a lot of research, and that extends the time for writing a book. I wonder how that works with a painting. I don't know if research goes into making. I'd love a painter to answer that for me. How much time goes into making a painting, and is there research involved? So with this book, The Artist Colony, I really wanted to write just a mystery. My intention was to write a mystery, a caper. And I started with a mystery, but at the same time, I was researching my great aunt's work and the history of the artist colony in Carmel by the Sea. And there became a conflict between the two, and they became closer and closer to merging, and then they became one book. So what started as a quick mystery, because I wanted to write something quickly, became an historical mystery, and that extended it. So it was a 5-year process before I finished the book and was ready to put it out.
Yeah, I totally get that. And that makes me think about something that I was seeing in the chat, just sort of to kind of go back to our, kind of moving all of these things together in a way, talking about how to work through self-doubts. And Joanna, you had the really, important and insightful, answer or thought about relying on, you look at the other artists in the field, other writers. And then Mari brought up, having a writers group. And I saw in the chat, I think it's Sandy was talking about having a critique group that has been meeting since 1992. And I think that is such a valid and important part of it, because I think for me personally, how I feel about it, and maybe others, this might resonate, is that I think that creating art really relies not completely on solitude, but it really does. The solitude is essential, and then, but it also relies kind of on a sort of community, which I think the critique part comes in, and it sort of feels like you can't really, maybe you can't really meet. I don't know. I often think for myself, I feel like, it's so much easier for me to be with the solitude part. And then there comes a time where it's like, well, I really need the community part. And I underestimated how important that might be, like with this critique group in the chat that Sandy's talking about. It really does keep you going, and it gives you something to take in and think about, and if there are other directions that you might need to move in, or helps you deepen a particular part that you didn't realize is really affecting others, the viewer in the case of the visual art, or the reader. There's so many similarities, I think, in both of these, in both of these artistic fields. And then I saw that somebody answered in the chat that they're writing nonfiction, and thank you for bravely saying that you are writing. It's not always easy to, I think, to admit that. But
Peg, if I can interject.
Sure.
I mean, for myself, solitude is key. I mean, I like the old story of Virginia Woolf. You have to have a room of your own. You got to be able to close the door. And I could never work with a group in the beginning. I need to get the book down. I need to get a first draft down, even a second draft down. And then I do have readers, and I do have an editor. Like, we need our editors. The editors are very important. But as far as working with a group, I have done that in the past, but I feel in my life now with my writing, it really is about working with myself and creating these characters. I'm not by myself. I have these characters that I have imagined and written into my story. So I have a full room of people, including a dog.
It's noisy in there, doesn't it?
It's very noisy in there, and they all are competing, and they all want my attention. And then I have this wonderful dog, because I love dogs. So I put a dog into my story so that he keeps me company when I get lonely. So just in my world as a writer, that's how I work. I mean, everyone is so different. Everyone has their different ways. But for me, it is a lot of solitude. And then when I feel really comfortable with, which can be 8, 10 revisions later, then I have the editor, and then I have readers who I trust to read the book for me and give me their opinions.
Absolutely. And I think you make a really great point, because I think that it's always changing too. It's kind of just about the time that we think that our process in our creative process is a certain way, it does change, and we can feel a bit lost when that happens. And I think it's essential to really be able to understand that. And I think that comes to something you said before about having other authors, their books. And so I think it's also helpful to read interviews with other creators, other artists, because I mean, it really can be helpful in understanding that there are moments where I think things change, where you can feel very lost. For example, I recently had to move my office, or my where I do. Well, I have two offices where I do my work for the publishing press, but also I try not to mingle that with where I do my creative work. And I had to move these rooms around in my house for reasons I won't get into. But I really felt so lost. It was so strange because in my younger years, I always felt like I could write or create anywhere. And I just really went through kind of an upheaval, and it was such a strange experience. And I feel that, visual artists must feel so much the same way. I know there's just so much to talk about, but I feel like maybe I should just ask if, anyone who is still here that has, a question that they'd like to ask of the authors. Now would be the time to do it, because I know. Okay, so okay, Jan, do you just want to verbally ask it? Go ahead.
Sure. I'm on, and I apologize for moving around. I'm at the beach, and so this has been a technological challenge. And I just put on real clothes. If you were watching, that's supposed to be sort of funny. But moving away from the art and the rigor and the pain of writing, what has been the reaction of your readership to the stories of these women? Because I write a blog for AWA, I'm on the board, every other month on forgotten women artists, and I've spent my career doing so. What has been the reaction of your unearthing, if you will, your relatives, your very important relatives too, I might add? What do people, what kind of feedback do you get?
That's such a wonderful question, Jan. It really is. Joanna, do you want to go first on that?
Sure. I think having this story of my great aunt has really drawn people into my historical mystery. Because it's such an addition, it's such a wonderful story for me, and that radiates out into my book and into my readers. So that story, finding that art studio of my great aunts, which was so much gave me the inspiration.
That was amazing.
Yeah, it just, I still get excited about it because it was so extraordinary. And that was such a push. It's like, a great aunt saying, okay, now write the book, and so I think it adds, it definitely adds. And I think it's so important for us to tell the history of artists, all artists, because they're the ones who made it possible for us to be here now. So I think by relating back to a history of previous artists and writing about them is really helpful to people today.
Well, do people say, well, my great aunt Marie painted? Do you have that reaction? I often do.
Well, I'm not I'm a reader. No. Let me think. I don't think anybody's. No, it's more just loving my story. No, I have not run into that. No. Okay. Well, but maybe Mari has. Mari?
No, I've not, but I bet you have, Jan.
Well, I have to say to you, somebody tried to convince me to collect Agnes Belton in Palm Springs many years ago, and I did not take their advice, and I wish I had. So
she's still there, essentially. The Palm Springs Museum does own quite a bit of her work. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine who moved into her house and studio and who had never heard of her was gifted with information by someone who did know about her. And what he was so inspired by her that he has kind of created her studio as it was and made it into a very small museum. So she's still there. She's still
in Cathedral City.
in Cathedral City, yes.
What my final question is, I'm mentoring, I'm a relic now, I've decided. I've crossed over to being a relic, and I didn't even know when it happened. But I wasn't aware of it, but I'm mentoring a young writer now who's writing about her great aunt, who was a fairly prominent artist and certainly a character in Santa Fe, beginning in 1921. She's writing a book somewhat like you're writing. Do you have any writers group or organization in this genre that I could send her to?
Not really. I think if she really should, and probably already has, jumped into researching, because that for me is, I just love it, because what it does is give me a sense of the authentic. I find photographs, and there's a strange little tree or something, you know, it just thrills me. And do you know the painter's name?
Oh, yes, Dorothy Newkirk Stewart, and she and her sister moved there on Canyon Road. But this young woman has already written the manuscript. In fact, I have it here with me this weekend, so this is timely. But her citations are casual, and I can almost read the words of others. Yet, if I may call them, the meat and potatoes of the story are very much there. I'm very exhilarated and happy, and I think she has a wonderful thing going here. But which way is she going? You know,
Is this
casual read.
nonfiction? Sorry, is this nonfiction?
Yeah, this
It's
woman
nonfiction.
did exist. And
Wendy, are you still here?
Wendy, I know Wendy. Is
Wendy
Wendy
good?
still here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I think you're a really appropriate person to maybe help with this answer.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Jan. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, you know, I don't know of any kind of group like that, honestly. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really.
Well, I know Wendy knows, and you two know, there are thousands of stories of these women artists. And if we could get, you know, some motivation going, some push to
Well,
get
there's a
these
lot of
stories.
books that are already there about women artists who are not as famous as they might be. It's a good biography of Georgia O'Keeffe was written, and she's very famous, but it's
Wendy has worked on the Bruton sisters, who were to me the most wonderful California artists to come to light of late. Wendy, is your book published?
Yes, it was published in October, and it's called Sisters in Art, and it's about the three Bruton sisters who were.
That's great. I'm going to write that down.
And from this, why I was asking Wendy is because of, so we just had lunch yesterday. So the hottest news is Wendy wrote a nonfiction book. She had this inspiration. She needed to write this book. She wrote this book, and now she now has a, I guess it's a university in San Diego, not yet, University of Davis, is interested in it. And now there's going to be a show.
Fabulous.
It's going to be a show. So why I wanted Wendy to come in, because I thought, okay, here's someone who she really believes in this story that she's written. It's done, right? The story is done. So now she's more looking, I don't know if she's looking for a group. It sounds like she's more looking for a publisher or finding other ways to put her book out there if it's already finished.
Well, I would sure wish, I have to leave very quickly now, but I sure wish we could organize a symposium, a forum of people like you three, bringing these forgotten women. Agnes Pelton's not forgotten these days, but together, because I think there are more of us than, no matter what genre we're writing, and there's more than we know. And there are thousands of stories to be told.
Yeah, and I
It's
just
a
want to
wonderful
answer
idea.
quickly. Could I just answer quickly? The
Sure.
reaction that I've gotten most from my book is people telling me they feel they made a new friend. And that is spectacular and has nothing to do with being forgotten or restored or any of that. But it's a book that was written with love and is kind of transmitting that in a way that's working. So thank you for the question.
Well, I really loved
Yeah.
it. And thank you for spending your Saturday with us.
Thank you for
And
having
Jan, I think that's a really great idea to think about a potential, even just, I don't know, a way to really talk about this, because it sounds like there's a very good case for an anthology of writing like this. There must be plenty of, potentially a publisher who would want to do a series. There are a lot of things to consider, because it's definitely very important. And I wanted to say thank you, Sandra, for putting the link to Jan's blog up. I'm really looking forward to checking that out. And I know we must be getting like very close to, like, I know we probably have to just
We're a
end
little
this.
bit over, but I didn't want to
Yeah.
interrupt. It's been such a great, I think Sandy did have one question that maybe would be a great one. I don't know if you saw that one go by, but she was asking, when did each of you know you were a writer? Did you suddenly, in the midst of a process or in a project, just say, I'm a writer, and how did you get the courage to do your first book?
Well,
It's a great question, I think.
Yeah, it is a good question. For myself, I started writing when I was around a young girl, and I would go off to Girl Scout brownie meetings, and we would go off for the weekend. And I was not terribly popular. I was pretty quiet, and I was the last chosen for the team. Those sport games where everyone's, I'll take her, and nobody took me. But so I had a few problems growing up. So I found that I could, though, around the campfire, start telling a story. And I had my favorite story was a young girl who's in a car and it's dark out, and suddenly there is this terrible, huge, hairy arm coming through the window and grabbing her neck. And I was able to create stories from that, and I kept building on them. And I would watch the campfire girls, and they were all like listening. They were like, wow, this is great. And I had popularity for telling these stories at the campfire. So that is where I started. And then I didn't do anything for 35 years after that. But I always remembered how much I loved telling stories. So when I was 50 years old, I quit a career in business and went back to school to Sarah Lawrence and got a master's degree. And from that, I went on to write my thesis was a memoir, and then I wrote 3 novels. So it just took time. I had to have a career. I had to make a living, all that stuff. I had children. So yes. So when I turned 50, I became a serious writer and have now published 3 books. There, Mari.
Let's see. I didn't want to be a writer. Everybody wanted me to be a writer, but I didn't. And I wanted to be a Broadway star. And that didn't work out. And there's a saying in theater that if you have to act, if you have to, you must, then do it as long as you can do it. The first day you understand that you could do something else, do that. And I became interested, I had moved to Hollywood, and I became interested in story development and film and screenplay writing and all that. So I took a master's in film writing, and then that didn't work. So then I just settled down, and I went to a wonderful graduate school in Asheville, North Carolina, called Warren Wilson Program for Writers, where I met Peg the first day I was there, I think. And
Yes,
yeah,
you were right across from me in the
that's
dorm.
right, in
You're
the
one of the
dorm.
first people I
10
met.
days in a dorm will do it, you know. And that was a spectacular, wonderful program that created a spectacular community of writers, which was the founders' aim. And so I sort of gradually accepted that I was a writer, and gradually people accepted also that I was a writer. And I became a film critic when I moved to San Francisco, film and theater critic, and la. And now I know I'm a writer because I have this book in my hand. And anybody that says you're not a writer, I can say, oh, yes, I am. You go ahead and get your name on a cover and see how hard it is. And one thing I'd like to add is that Peg Alford Pursell is a spectacular writer. And Peg, do you have your book nearby?
Oh,
And I just want
did.
Okay,
I don't.
it's called
Yeah.
A Girl Goes Into the Forest. It's absolutely amazing. And she was kind enough to serve as host for us, and we are very grateful.
Are you all
Aw,
seeing?
thank
Are you
you.
all seeing this? You're seeing
Yes.
this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mari. I really appreciate that. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I just feel like this could go on. I feel like I've been saying this all along, but there's so much. And just talking about even the idea about research, and I'm sure that has its components with visual artists. There's just so much we could go on and on about, but I think it's probably time to, I'm trying to see my time. Yeah, we're getting close to
Yeah.
2:30. So Sandra, I just want to thank you so much for this, and thank everybody for being here. It was just so rich, and I hope that there will be more of an interchange between the literary arts and the visual arts. So thank you so much. And congratulations, Joanna and Mari. Your books are beautiful. I hope everybody will definitely avail themselves of it, of their books. So
I
okay.
agree. This was sort of an experiment for us, but I love it. And I think you're right. We could continue this conversation in so many different and interesting ways about creativity and women artists in all different realms. It's been just wonderful. So thank you for helping us try a new way of programming. I think it was great. And it was great to see some of our members. Sandy is another board member who was asking you a question, is a phenomenal watercolorist. So it's been nice to see all of these creative people together in one place. So thank you all. We're getting lots of great comments in the chat that people enjoyed it. And I said, we're recording, so we will get it on YouTube. And yes, let's not let this be the last time that we all get together.
You, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra.
Okay,
thank you, Mari.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Okay,
Peg.
thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay,
Bye-bye
thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Oh,
I don't have a cursor right now. Oh, well, you can definitely just quit for me. Okay, I'm going to quit. I'll
Okay.
see you guys.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye. Is it just us? Hey, Jan.